Tim, Scott just reeled off a who's who list of nice guys in the business that you might have to note on your Friday posts.
No, I mean, you'll have to add the sound effect because the names that he mentioned were...
Well, I'm not a name dropper, so I didn't mean...
No, you're not. No, we know that.
No,
listen, our guests never name drop. They drop names, but they don't name drop. They drop impressive names of good people that are leaders, but they can do it because it's absolutely credible. We, on the other hand, completely name drop.
You both have been highly successful executives in our business.
I was just telling David Beckham that exact thing.
Welcome to Wait, What? SportsBiz Chat with DP and McGhee. This is the podcast that takes an often irreverent, sometimes cynical, and on occasion a serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, David 𝘠𝘬.
And I'm Tim McGhee.
Well, I trust those that make up our U.S.-based audience are readying for a great July 4th holiday weekend. This is the first time I've been stateside in a couple years, so I'm pretty psyched about all that. But I'm going to throw it over to you first, Tim, and ask what's on your mind.
Do you remember the significance of June 17th, 1994?
Well, no, but I think there is significance.
Yes, it was. They made a 30 for 30 about it. It was the day of the O.J. Simpson slow-speed car chase. Arnold Palmer teed off for the last time at the U.S. Open. Knicks and Rangers were in their respective finals. It's a pretty significant day in the world of sports and culture.
It's also my mom's birthday, so I should have just said that. But
yes, yes, absolutely. Anyway, yesterday was probably not as significant, but there was a lot of stuff going on in the world of sports and culture yesterday. Happy Bobby Bonilla Day to you, my co-host.
Why, thank you. Why, thank you. I'm sure there are indeed a lot of people, maybe just not at the Mets, that are celebrating that day.
One of my friends actually mentioned that because they deferred his contract, they were able to sign Mike Hampton. When Mike Hampton left, they got a draft pick, which turned into David Wright. So these Met fans have added to the significance of it. But there was a lot of other things that go on July 1st, Bobby Bonilla Day being one of them. Second was Debbie Harry's 80th birthday.
Wow.
Still looks phenomenal.
Yep.
Debbie Harry, the lead singer of Blondie.
We do need to make sure that, because to us that's a no-brainer, but to our younger audience,
that's
maybe
why
they do
I mentioned
need to.
Who Debbie Harry was.
You want to explain who Blondie was? No.
Blondie was a very popular post-punk new wave group out of New York back in the 70s. Had some big hits. Call Me, which was from the American Gigolo soundtrack. Heart of Glass. Rapture, which is one of the first, if not the first, sort of mainstream bands that did a rap song. It's also in 1984 the first day that the motion picture industry used the PG-13 rating. Big day, July.
Wow, is this going to be a new feature, by the way, that each day we record or the day after or whatever the case may be, you're going to do the historical search on it?
I just thought it was just such a confluence of events. And then more recently and more germane to the title of this podcast, yesterday was the day that universities could start paying their student athletes. We might want to change that moniker and start calling them athlete students at this point.
Athlete, right. Listen, I think the Bobby Bonilla thing has become such a funny topic, and there was a brilliance to his concept. In fact, a friend of the show's, Andy Clark, who runs the sport management program at DePaul, sent me an ad just the other day from Nuveen, former client of mine, actually, that in their whole business is guaranteed income investments, right? And Bobby Bonilla does this ad about the beauty of guaranteed income. And if you go back and look at the history of the deal that his team cut, that's all he wanted. He wanted, and that was the way they structured this deal, is that he wanted guaranteed, 1.5 about every July 1.
Somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million.
And he gets that for a number of more years. And he gets money from the Orioles too, by the way. The dude just played it right.
His agent, and I forget who it was, really set up his client for life. I'm going to ask you a trivia question, which I know you're not going to know because I had no idea. But do you remember what the first movie was that got the PG-13?
Jaws?
No, it was 1984. But that probably would have gotten it at that point. $1.9 million he gets every year.
Oh.
Altogether.
Nice.
Yeah. I never would have guessed this unless I heard it was Red Dawn, the original Red Dawn.
No, definitely would not have guessed that.
I think we as a nation owe a debt of gratitude to Patrick Swayze et al. For keeping us safe from those damn commies.
All right. Okay. You did trivia. You did Bobby Bonilla Day and other references. Is there another big lead you want to go with, or are you passing along?
No. I'm handing it off to you.
Going back and forth in my head and what I wanted to lead with, but I think that because we've talked about it on the show, and maybe because the NBA season just wrapped up, there is another scandal. You have now mentioned this multiple times because one of your predictions is there was going to be a big scandal. This one might be it. Malik Beasley, who until recently was with the Detroit Pistons, is now a free agent, is caught up in being investigated. Hasn't been charged with anything yet, but being investigated for some behavior around betting, prop bets, etc. And based on what I'm seeing and some of the the stats at weird times, it doesn't look good. And you compound all this with the fact that he has had so many people come after him, including his former agents. He had a dentist that was able to garnish his wages because he hadn't paid a bill that was like $34,000. Now, this guy, Malik Beasley, had on the table a rather significant $42 million 3-year deal from the Pistons that's now been rescinded. And I'm not sure why they can't pay their dentists. And that's one of several people that have gone after him for unpaid bills.
They get dental insurance as part of the CBA? Seriously.
I'm sorry I'm laughing, but yeah. It might have been
and
out of plan deal.
Yeah, he went in network.
You have called this on multiple occasions. And I go back to the thing that you kept bringing up, which was one of the more, I think, I'll just say it now. I think I've said in the past silly, but maybe stupid comments made by a commissioner. And we have great respect for Adam Silver. But to say that he's not worried about this because the players make too much money, and I just quoted the number that was on the table for Malik Beasley that is no longer there. And yes, they make a lot of money, but that doesn't mean these players aren't going to get into some issues for potentially a variety of reasons.
What I also found interesting about this whole story is this goes back to his time with the Bucks, whom he played for in the 23-24 season. And the game in question was in January of 2024, so a year and a half ago. And we're just hearing this week. So what I would love to know is how soon after that game the investigation started. Because if it takes a year plus for them to identify this unusual activity on the betting side of things, that doesn't bode well for policing this thing. I tend to think that we're just now hearing about an ongoing investigation that's probably been going for quite some time. But I would love to know when that investigation began.
Yeah, but the authorities are being clear to say, and his agent, of course, now that nothing's been charged. But I think you're probably right. At the same time, there haven't been charges, so I don't have any reporting that says how long this investigation has been going.
Yeah, the one game that I read about, I think the over under on the number of rebounds was 2.5, and there was unusual betting activity on the under, and he wound up getting 6 rebounds in that game. I don't know. Does that mean that?
Well, I saw one where it was an over under. I don't think it was an over. It was a line situation, and he gets a rebound when they had clearly lost the game. And he gets an offensive rebound after a free throw, darts down with no one contesting him because there was no reason to contest him. He goes down and dunks the ball, sprints as fast as he can to get down before the buzzer goes off. And I thought that seemed a little odd.
Yeah.
To put the number where it needed to be on that.
It does not bode well for him. I think what we have seen is, now this is a higher profile player than 𝘳𝘪𝘴𝘦 Parker. I wouldn't say he's a superstar, but he was somebody who the team was willing to give a significant amount of money to. Whenever I read about these things, I always think to myself, does this qualify as the scandal that you and I have discussed?
I think I gave you a bit of an out on that, meaning there's some options here. And that is it just, is there a certain number that hit, whether they're super huge or not? And now this is the third time we've spoken of this.
Well, that old saying, 3 points make a trend.
There you go. Well, one of the interesting things to me is that I think just this past week, the NCAA at the Division I level has basically supported changing the rules that would allow athletes to bet on pro games. Still can't bet on college games, but bet on pro games, because there had been a total zero tolerance policy on sports betting at the college level. And that's now changing. So you have that, and then you have this news. And again, it's just,
it's a very
the slippery slope thing is probably an overused term, but these are slippery slope issues.
Absolutely. And I think, it's not a direct analogy, but when you look at some of the rule changes in baseball, for example, Major League players were grandfathered in, but at a certain point they disallowed chewing tobacco among their players, and that started at the minor league level. When you look at the rule changes like the pitch clock, start at the minor league level. And so what it does is it conditions these baseball players for what it's going to be like if and when they get to the majors. Well, what we're telling these college athletes then is you can bet while you're in school on pro basketball, but that once you get out, you can no longer bet on it. I don't know. I don't know why the NCAA is doing that.
What's next for you?
Well, the FIFA Club World Cup is continuing to go on, not without controversy. For example, 𝘚𝘤𝘰𝘵 who's the manager of Chelsea, in a post-game press conference the other day when talking about the number of weather delays that there were, called it a joke. He subsequently walked back his comments, said he didn't mean to suggest that the competition itself was a joke, but it was a joke that there were so many weather delays. Well, in this time of year in this country, that's a possibility in a lot of different areas, regions of the country. Now, this is a little bit earlier than, well, no, it's actually the same time period that the World Cup's going to be. So, I think it's just a fact of the time of year in the United States. I do understand that these players, right, when they sit for too long, they get stiff, and then they have to, obviously they have to get ready to go back in, and it might affect substitution patterns and strategy and things like that. Of all the things to go after about FIFA Club World Cup, weather to me is a bit of an odd thing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, we've been a little tough on Club World Cup, of course, here on this podcast. The Atlanta game featuring Inter Miami and PSG did draw over 65 to see PSG utterly destroy Inter Miami 4-0, which of course led a lot of people to just say that this is, there's a long way to go. Let's put it that way. But PSG was UEFA Champions League champions this past year and kind of sailed through that. And there was a great match against Liverpool at one point that booted them out of it. But they're great. They're an exceptional team, and they manhandled Inter Miami.
Yeah, when you look, the cream is starting to rise to the top as we get into the quarterfinals on Friday and Saturday. You've got Chelsea, PSG and Bayern Munich should be a great match. Real Madrid, Dortmund, another one on Saturday. But then you got Al Hilal, who beat Man City yesterday.
Right.
Pretty cool match. They'll be playing Fluminense, and then Chelsea going to be playing Palmeiras. So Chelsea, has rebounded over the last couple of years after having a pretty down year in the 2023-24 season. Yeah, so the cream is rising to the to the top in this competition for sure.
Yeah, and I think it got off to a slow start. I think we were critical for the right reasons. Still question whether the timing was right, and this ended up being a smart move. Part of that is that CONCACAF Gold Cup is going on as well. At the time, so, there's somewhat competing interests from building the sport in the U.S. as far as I see it. But, yes, as the teams go on, and there's great players to follow, there are great teams to follow, we'll see if it continues in terms of being able to. But if a match was going to draw a massive crowd, Inter featuring Messi against PSG, his former team, was going to do it. There's no doubt about that.
It's interesting when you mentioned the competition between CONCACAF and FIFA, you didn't mention that a full slate of MLS matches are continuing at the same time, which is another choice for the consumer on what to follow. But you didn't mention, and I'm not calling you out. I'm just saying that when you think about those two, CONCACAF and FIFA, they're more comparable than either of those two to MLS.
Right, but I'm looking at it from the global, the international component of it.
Yes.
And because NWSL actually takes off the month of July for the international window. We do have a great guest coming up, and I think maybe we'll hit the sponsor spotlight at the end, if that's cool with you. I did want to talk quick WNBA expansion. They finally announced the teams, and that will be joining the league by 2030. There's 3: Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Detroit in 2029, Philadelphia the season after. Cleveland will start in 2028, and they hit the ground running, already got deposits for a nice number, 2,500 tickets, deposit for season tickets in the first 24 hours. Great sign for the league. I think, and these are good cities with great basketball traditions.
Yep, $250 million franchise fee for each one of those clubs. And they said that the Philly franchise in particular was a direct result of the deal between Harris Blitzer and Comcast Spectacor to partner on that. Not only partner on the franchise, but partnering on the new arena that's going to go up in South Philly, and that complex that also includes the Link. And was it PNC? Is PNC in Philly?
PNC's
Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh. Citizens is the baseball, and Lincoln Financial is the football. I got to have, keep some degree of Philly creds, don't I?
I would say so. So we ready to take a break?
We could, or we could try to bang it out now, our sponsor spotlight.
How do we feel about these sponsorship deals?
A couple of big things in the news. I know you've got one. I've got a couple. The Nationals signed AARP as their new sleeve sponsor. I believe 𝘚𝘰𝘵 represented AARP in those negotiations. Interesting insofar as the league is continuing to try to age down its audience, but obviously AARP must have seen a good not only brand fit but audience fit as well. So that's a nice deal for the Nationals. And then Live Golf continues to add sponsors. MGM Resorts will now host some live events, not necessarily tournaments, but other league events as they come on board as a sponsor. Interesting, I read just today, Scott O'Neill, CEO of Live Golf, wasn't exactly optimistic about a merger between the PGA Tour and Live. So maybe things are changing. He said he was planning on speaking with Brian Rolapp at the Open Championship later this month, but maybe that's not what success looks like between these two golf entities.
I agree. I think that the picture may be very different than what we thought, and it could be these standalone tours that fit whatever the need of the athlete is, and that they'll be playing in the majors collectively and in the various international competitions such as President's Cup and Ryder Cup. And that may just be a fine thing. I think with with having Scott there and the heft that they have both money-wise and I think now management-wise, they can go this direction. They know how to bring sponsors in, and they could position this thing and brand this in a way. They haven't been able to drum up that much support from a TV side yet, a viewership side, but they have some exciting players. It would be nice to see those players consistently playing well, but I think they may have some things going in its favor that at least keep it going this way, and as they build the brand, they might be able to go. On the AARP deal with the Nationals, AARP is obviously an organization that needs Washington quite a bit. It's a lobbying effort. Being in Washington, D.C. with the sponsorship, that visibility and the benefits that come with that is a great move for them.
It's time for our guest.
So we are back and thrilled to be welcoming our guest for this week. Scott Carmichael is the founder and CEO of Prodigy Search, a leading firm specializing in the executive search in sports and entertainment. Now, before launching and building Prodigy, Scott had a more traditional career in the sports marketing field with leadership stints at the LA Kings, the NHL, and ANC, the digital media firm mostly known for its signage system at sports venues. I also need to note, Scott, that you are a graduate of Loyola Marymount, my father's alma mater, and I think that's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Welcome, and thank you for joining
us.
us.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored to be asked. So I appreciate you and Tim inviting me to come on.
Sure.
All right, we're going to just go ahead and jump right into it. You are almost 18 years into running your company. What would you say are the biggest changes to the search field since you began nearly 2 decades ago?
Well, it's interesting because it's really become a pretty crowded space, which is makes us fight and claw and scratch every day. But when I started in 2007, really there was Buffy Filippo, whom you probably know, and what she had done at Teamwork, done a phenomenal job and built licenses for leagues and teams and so forth, and Turnkey, Len Perna, and I'm simplifying that in terms of a boutique side of the business. So really 3 of us. For the most part, and clearly there were the large global firms from Korn Ferry and Spencer Stewart, etc. And now, I mean, look at it. 17 years later, there's a number of different people in the research world. I mean, and the consolidation and mergers of such, where you had Nolan Partners, who originated in the UK and like some others came over here to the US. Well, they a couple of years ago were acquired by Excel, obviously the large agency, and then CAA has had a search division for a number of years, but the leveraging that they put up against their other business units. Recently, Elevate and what Elevate's done, and across their different verticals as well, talent. And then there's a handful of others that might be sole proprietors and so forth. So it's clearly, got crowded and more competitive. But I'm a competitive guy, and I like to go out and fight and win. We don't win them all, but we certainly have been fortunate to win our fair shares. And then the other thing I'll say is that another area that we compete with is a lot of organizations, teams, agencies and others, but mostly teams, have hired their own, have really expanded their internal talent acquisition groups. So where you had the traditional HR discipline handling, some of the recruiting and giving it over to their hiring execs. Now it's not unusual to have 2 or 3 or 6 or 10 talent acquisition recruiters within an organization. And so when an owner or executive has invested in building that out internally, for them to justify going out and bringing in an executive search firm is understandably a little tougher to justify. So it's changed a lot in that regard, but we've been fortunate to keep doing well after almost 18 years.
So what was the impetus for you to start Prodigy? You were on a great trajectory with your career, with I guess what could be described as more traditional sports properties. What was the impetus? What drove you to start Prodigy?
I get asked that question quite a bit, and I just kind of morphed into it, to be quite frank. So David, as you mentioned, I was at the NHL for almost 10 years, and I went to go over to ANC Sports really to help 𝘳𝘪𝘴𝘦, the principal there, who was a good friend. You kind of build
past guest, by the way, past guest.
Nice, good, dear friend, and brought me on to help kind of make. Jerry knows everybody, but and make more introductions and broaden the business. But in doing, after a year or two with Jerry, had somebody come to me and said, "Hey, have you thought about an executive search?" There was a good friend of mine. You guys might know 𝘚𝘤𝘰𝘵 who's in the business. Glenn and I worked at the NHL a handful of years ago. And so we're kicking around and said, I did a lot of that at the NHL indirectly, right? When I ran their team consulting division, I use the analogy of Teambo, although we had about at our peak 7, and I think Teambo at their peak had 70. But I did a lot of, part of the responsibilities were, hey, we're looking for some people. Do you know anybody? And it was an indirect recruiting role, right, in terms of my consulting side. So I kicked it around and said, that's interesting. I know a lot of people. I've been fortunate over almost 40 years to been in the business, 35 years in the business. And a good friend of mine, Greg McElroy, was at the Dallas Cowboys, and Greg and I worked together very closely at the LA Kings, and said, hey, and I talked to him, and he goes, we're expanding, I need some help. And so jumped into right away into the fire, and just kind of, it got rolling. And another good friend of mine, Marty Greenspun, who worked with Greg and I at the Kings, was an executive at the Yankees, and then he too gave us a couple projects. So we were lucky enough to have the Dallas Cowboys and New York Yankees as our first clients, which didn't stink, and just were able to grow it, through a strong network.
Tim, Scott just reeled off a who's who list of nice guys in the business that you might have to note on your Friday post.
No, I mean, you'll have to add the sound effect, because the names that he mentioned were...
Well, I'm not a name dropper, so I didn't mean to...
No, you're not. No, we know that. No, but listen, our guests never name drop. They drop names, but they don't name drop. They drop impressive names of good people that are leaders, but they can do it because it's absolutely credible. We, on the other hand, completely name drop.
You both have been highly successful executives in our business.
I was just telling David Beckham that exact thing. What's some of the companies that you work with, what do they overlook? And you mentioned that some of them are bringing in-house, so I would imagine they're probably prone to the same type of mistakes. But what is something that companies overlook when they're looking to hire and going through that hiring process? And then second part of the question is, what do candidates not focus on that maybe they should be?
A good question, Tim. I thought about that because that you floated that as a potential question. It's interesting because I think there's a lot of different nuances, and it really depends on the client. And again, we have great clients. I've been fortunate to have probably over 150 different organizations we work with throughout the time. I'd say if there were one area that would be, in some cases, the most challenging is when you get a talent group. And again, this isn't meant to disparage them whatsoever, but when you've got either an HR representative, executive, and or a talent recruiter internally, they generally don't know the deep nuances of what that role might be. So if someone's looking for a chief revenue officer, or someone's looking for someone to come in and lead their their key revenues, whether it be premiums or corporate partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. Bringing in a recruiting agency like ours who have lived and breathed it and done it and know it just provides a great value to that organization. And I think that's where companies, and again, I'm painting it with a wide brush here, right? But that's where companies, I think, will struggle the most, in that as the executive works within their internal group to engage a search firm, they're not necessarily understanding what a Tim McGhee or David Perel may need within their organization. And that's our expertise, right? So that's probably, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we get from a candidate side, not so much on the senior executive side. And that's where we do most of our searches. I'd say VP, C-level, C-suite. But there are many times where a candidate has never worked with or not that aware of the I don't call it nuances, but working with a recruiting firm, right? So they may not be as communicative, they may not be as responsive, they may not know, and I say very humbly, I think our brand is pretty well known out there, but if one of my recruiters from Prodigy Search calls, he or she may not know how to react or respond, in a quick amount of time, or a relative amount of time. So that's one end, but there's one, I wrote myself a note. There's one that has happened, believe it or not, more than you would think, and it's our biggest, probably the biggest frustration levels. When you're talking to a candidate, you're recruiting them, you're narrowing the list down. You've got 2 finalists, 3 finalists. They're narrowing in on one person. You've had conversation with he or she for what would probably, in many cases, be 2, 3, 4 weeks. Relocation, are you going to go from Houston to Miami? Yeah, I'm definitely in. We're excited. And then you get to the point and say, okay, they're going to make you an offer, and then go, well, let me talk to my spouse. I'm going, wait, we've been talking to you for 4 weeks. We've talked about the relocation, and you haven't had that conversation. And then, very frustrating, it doesn't happen that often, they'll come back and say, you know what, my wife or my spouse is like, we can't move. And so you've wasted not just our time, but most importantly, the clients in the hiring organization's time. So that's an area that a candidate need to be better at, and having those.
So you find yourself in the relationship counseling business, it seems like.
Yeah, in some cases we might come down a little hard when we get that response. but that, probably I can count on 2 hands at times that's happened, so not very frequently.
Hey, you talked about the competitive set changing, and it's changed aggressively. But you've been able to keep your doors open for a long time, a successful brand in this space. Like, top line, what do you think your differentiator is? Like, what allows you to be competitive? What are the things that you would point to that is in the ethos of Prodigy Search that makes you guys a little different? And
we've been leaning on that a lot lately, David, because of that merger, the consolidation, the agencies, and I say this respectfully, but where I think they are perhaps conflicted. So if they're out, one of the agencies who's got multiple divisions, multiple verticals, and they're out pitching a commercial deal, or they're maybe working on their ticketing or their arena development, and say, oh, by the way, we got a search division. I would say respectfully, what the differentiator is, not just the depth and the many years that I and my team have been around, but we're partner led. And I think that's really, really something we lean in on, because we're not out landing a search with the Dallas Wings, which we just did yesterday, and then turn it over to a 22-year-old young kid to work with Jason Bitzoff or Lauren Turner. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, we were talking to Scott or Mark or Kevin, the principals in the agency, now we're turning it over. So partner led and partner involved in every step of the way. We may not be conducting the search. I may not be doing many of the searches by any means, but we know we have the point of contact. I think that's a really important differentiator. And boutique, right? We're boutique very intentionally. We got a total staff of 10. That's intentional. But we're global in our scale. And so I think it's intentional and independence and partner led, intentionally boutique, and anybody can say this, but I think we're very, very good. It'll put us up against anybody out there in terms of our network and our research and our experience.
Before I ask the next question, Scott, we have a tradition on the show when somebody says good question, we give credit to the person who wrote the question. So you said good question when I asked you the question about what companies overlook, and that was written by David, so I have to give David credit where credit is.
Good job, David. That's good.
I'm having a decent year this year. Tim has slaughtered me the first couple of years of the show, I think, but I'm feeling pretty good about this year.
Well, David uses AI to write his question.
Speaking of,
I'm kidding, because I'm segueing into my next question to you, Scott, which is, how is AI changing your business, if at all yet?
Tim, I get asked that, and we run across that quite a bit of late, right? Not just with some questions that may come up from candidates or clients, but things you may read about how, especially I get sensitive to it when you say how AI is changing the recruiting business and how AI will eventually kind of, weed that out. And I'll say first and foremost, AI doesn't have that personal one-on-one touch. I mean, you've got to have that human connection. And I don't want to sound like an old guy who's in his mid-60s and saying, not embracing technology. But in our world, and I said it earlier, we're one-to-one. We touch the individuals. We touch them daily and multiple times a day. And AI doesn't do that. Now, do we use AI to help us in areas, whether it be some research, whether it be some putting together and enhancing our profiles or documents we may share with the candidates or clients? Absolutely, because everybody's doing that, and it's amazing the output of all that information you put in and where it comes out. So clearly using it more and more and more in that regard. But I would say, and again, I'm speaking very narrow in terms of what we do day to day. It really hasn't changed it. I'm not naive to think it won't continue to evolve, and we will have to pivot and evolve as well, but really not a factor in terms of the one-on-one recruiting that we're doing.
Yeah. Different than the scanning tools, say, that the big giant platforms and job boards are using to scour through thousands and thousands of resumes to look for the keywords.
And those are just aggregators, right? And then it could be a candidate, or it could be clients searching LinkedIn and all the other places for it. Again, that's the tech and the aggregator, not the human touch.
So looking kind of down the road a few years, put the lens of just looking at the industry as someone that deals with hiring and trends and so forth. Where are there going to be opportunities? What are going to be the hot areas of this business down the road? Do you see any changes happening there for people that are either thinking about getting in this business now or already in it and wondering what the future holds?
Well, I think there's a lot. The industry's evolved so much, and you guys certainly have been around and know it and see it too. But, there's a lot of different variables that I think will continue to evolve and expand opportunities and expand our business as a whole. And that's private equity. The influx, as you guys know and everybody sees, it seems like every day there's another entity that has put together a pool and an investment. But with the private equity, whether it's Arctos and you see a number of these that own a number of different properties, right? Well, it's expanded the opportunity. So you got, whether they're coming in and doing big mixed use developments, around new arenas. I've just read about Atlanta and what they're proposing, or whether Atlanta has an NHL expansion franchise and what they're proposing with all the mixed use from commercial and restaurant and residential, et cetera. So I think, private equity will continue to evolve and really expand opportunities. So that's exciting. Women's sports, right? I think it's not just, topical buzzword's the wrong word, but women's sports continues to look at the 3 expansion teams they announced yesterday for the WNBA. And, why am I forgetting his first name? I'm sorry, but Mr. Harris from Harris Blitzer, said, hey, Josh, chomping on the bit because he wants it for Philadelphia. And so I think women's sports will continue to be a big play, and there's more and more interest and excitement and opportunities that will continue to come out of that. As I mentioned, we just picked up 3 new projects for the Dallas Wings, and what the excitement they've got with their new arena and practice facility, of course, Paige Beckers and so forth and so on. So I think, and again, and they're one that continues to, and it's not necessarily new, but I think, data and analytics, whether, and we talked about AI, but I just mean so many different franchises, both on the performance side, the field, the court, and where, analytics comes into play, but analyzing the revenue streams and analyzing the industry and analyzing so much, and those roles have become very, very needy and popular as well. So I think that's where it's going to continue to roll and evolve.
David, is this your question or mine?
Well, I asked the last one, but
yeah, so then it would be mine. Scott, Prodigy was named a finalist last year at the SBJ Best Places to Work. Especially given the industry that you're in, what does that mean to you as somebody who's leading the company?
I was very humbled, Tim, by that, and very and extremely honored. Yes, that's there's the nomination process, and clearly a couple leaders from my organization submitted. So jaded, I guess, in terms of clearly a nomination to a degree, but the relationships that I've built throughout my years, but the team that I've been able to build and the culture, and I know that everybody talks culture, but you got to live and breathe it. And I think the culture that we've built here, it's my personality, and again I say that humbly. I don't want 10 clones of Scott Carmichael, but I've got a great team who work extremely hard, who are very, very loyal, very hardworking, and loyalty goes both ways, right? So, I think you've got to give and take. So I'm just very humbled by that, honored. I'm proud of the team we got, and we were recruiters, so we should be able to hire right, and we haven't always made the right decisions for us. And we've had some blips, but it's just a huge honor, and I was really humbled by the selection.
I think it was Michael Porter, the management guru, who said that culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yeah, I mean, look at it, it's used a lot, and I think there's a lot of sincerity with the use of culture, but you can't just say it, you got to do it. You got to display it, and that's what's important.
Yeah, listen, I think that, we started this conversation with you talking about the changing nature of the business and the competitive set that you're dealing with, and to be able to do this as long as you have successfully and still have the reputation and be landing the properties that you're getting and the companies you're getting to do searches for. I mean, a real credit to you on what you've built. So congratulations on that.
I appreciate that. It's I never thought, and again, I'm not to interrupt your next question, but you talk about starting 17 years ago, and I never envisioned, I didn't even consider myself entrepreneurial. I just, I worked, as you said, from the Lakers and Kings to the NHL, et cetera, and morphed into it. But, 17 years later, the amount of success we've had is very humbling.
Yeah, there's a great book called the E-Myth, and it's not E-Myth like we think of E now. It's the entrepreneurial myth. And I remember reading it when I started Deep Alliance the first time, and it spoke to the idea that most people, they don't necessarily set out, and it's not like I only can be an entrepreneur because I can't work for anyone and I'm this singular genius. It's because you have an expertise, you have a desire, maybe you want to try a change, and you go that path, and kind of the way you have to go about to do it. And I'm guessing that if you ever were to read that book, you'd find that you followed quite a few of those things, Scott. All right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now I was just going to launch into our final set of questions.
Perfect.
Which is the way we close every episode or a guest segment. So we have two questions for you. And we've talked a lot about what your history was, but we ask this first question, which is,
where'd your career get started? Where'd you start?
Well, a little fun fact that I don't merchandise or boast about, but a fun fact is I was a Laker ball boy when I was 11 years old, and in 1970, which obviously dates me, and everybody can do the math on it. But I was a Laker ball boy for 7 years, from 1970 to 77, and then was able to get a part-time job in running the Lakers press box in the late 70s into the early 80s, and I just was fortunate to be around sports for many years and took advantage of the opportunity, and was lucky to stay in the business of sport. And so it's hard work, and it was yes, a little bit of luck, but luck comes from hard work. And I just was able to, Jerry Buss owned the Lakers and Kings, and I worked for the Kings, and then et cetera. Got a young start and just took advantage of it and worked hard to stay in it.
That might be the coolest origin story we've had, David.
We've had unbelievable origin stories, but that's definitely the most fun one and not expected.
Well, and now that I'm on the East Coast, right, and living in the New York metro area, and of course the Knicks run this past year, and they were talking about
you wanted to go back and be a ball boy again,
and they talk about the last time the Knicks won the championship. I was a Laker ball boy in 1973, and so my second year of being a ball boy, the Lakers beat the Knicks in 1972, and was the Lakers' first local LA championship. But they played the Knicks 3 years in a row. So a lot of flashbacks as it relates to the Knicks run this year, and back to the last time they won their championship. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. And the final question, this is, you're dealing with people in this business all the time, but one piece of advice you'd give someone looking to break into the sports business.
It's like, David, it's like when I got in, I had an opportunity where the door got open, the door got cracked, and I got my foot in the door. And as you guys know, this is a great industry, but there aren't, a ton of jobs, and everybody wants to work in sports. And yet, how do they get started? I got my foot in the door and took advantage of it and worked hard. And if you have that opportunity and can get lucky enough and use a network or use a connection and get an introduction, and whether it's getting an internship or it's a post-grad role or it's a game night opportunity or wherever you get that type of exposure, take advantage of it. don't blow it. Don't take it for granted. And again, I'm not being an old guy painting the new generation of these entitled young professionals who think they deserve that. Quite the contrary. You're not going to, someone's not going to ring your doorbell and say, here you go, you got to work hard on it. And as they grow, use a network. I mean, you guys know, network. It's how I built my business. So if you get your foot in the door, you get a job, you want to stay in the business, build those relationships and build that network and take advantage of that network throughout your entire career. It'll lead to success for sure.
That's great. Great stuff. We appreciate that. We have been wanting to discuss this important part of the sports business. We don't normally talk about things like search, but it is an important element of our business. So it was wonderful to have you on to help talk through it.
Well, again, I'm honored. It's my pleasure, and I really, really appreciate you guys reaching out and inviting me the opportunity to talk for a little bit.
Of course. Thank you for coming on, and hopefully you have a fantastic 4th of July in beautiful New Jersey.
You as well. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
So we're back. Thank you again to Scott Carmichael, founder and CEO of Prodigy Search, one of the most highly respected search firms in the industry. We really appreciate him coming on. So David, now's the point in the show where we look forward, but I wanted to mention something that happened as we've been recording. It's being recorded by The Athletic and some other outlets that the Knicks are getting ready to offer Mike Brown their head coaching job. So if he does accept the job, he will become the 32nd coach in New York Knicks history. Coincidentally, he was the 32nd coach interviewed for this opening. No, I exaggerate, but only slightly.
Interesting hire. He's had some great success. He's had some not so great moments in 10 years.
Yeah, I think it was somewhat of a surprise when he was fired by the Sacramento Kings because he had overseen a turnaround with that club.
Okay, before Scott came on, we were in the process of doing a spotlight on sponsorship. You mentioned a couple of very exciting new developments in the sponsorship space. I had one I wanted to talk about that I'm going to keep my eye on, so it's kind of fitting with this part of the show anyway, and that's PayPal's sponsorship of the Big 12 and Big 10, and I'm suspecting that they will roll that out further, and this type of payment services in the new age beyond NIL, but the payment of the athletes directly, and being able to do that through a service like that, I mean, that's where sponsorship really starts clicking in, right? They're able to, show the utility of this. And now that athletes can be featured, of course, in advertising, I suspect we will see a lot of college athletes, particularly from these bigger conferences, promoting the PayPal brand. So very interesting. And Brett Yormark in particular has been very outspoken about what this could mean for the, for the leagues, for the conferences. One other shout out, two things. One, this is like I'm going to wear this all 4th of July. This is a non-sponsored shout out to 𝘚𝗏𝗄𝗧 Pizza. I'm not even sure if the place exists, but I got this from the MoneyGram Haas F1 team, and I thought it was cool, and I'm wearing it. So that's what my shirt is. I just had to wear it. I'm wearing it the entire 4th of July weekend. I've decided.
But it's not the pizza place that Ricky Bobby delivered for when he was.
It could be.
When he was out of racing for a short time, was it? Okay. If you're going to give him a shout out,
𝘚𝗏𝗄𝗧 is the home of
Dale
Earnhardt, of course, as well.
Boy, we haven't talked about that documentary since we watched it, but
we did launch it, and yes, I like the way you phrase that. We did pretty much launch it into the stratosphere. One other thing, speaking of things that we talked about and things I'm following, I had mentioned the John Oliver minor league baseball thing with the Erie Seawolves.
I actually saw them play the other night.
Under their new name? Have they totally?
No, but here's the interesting thing. They were playing at the Somerset Patriots here in New Jersey, and the Somerset Patriots actually renamed themselves for that night the New Jersey Diners.
I love that ballpark, by the way, Somerset Ballpark.
Yeah, we were, my friend got tickets, I think, third row, second row, right behind. Home plate, amazing. But
the rebrand is to become the Erie Moon Mammoths, and it's due to the fact that someone with the last name Moon had actually discovered a mammoth bone, I think somewhere maybe in Lake Erie or there, and it was a famous thing for a little bit, but no one has talked about it since. But they now have a mascot that's the Moon Mammoth, that is a mammoth that's purple, because mascots being purple seems to be a thing, and like an astronaut helmet, a space helmet. So that's the new mascot. So just wanted to bring that story to its finalization here. And what about you?
Well, I know you're going to be looking forward to Joey Chestnut competing on Friday in the Nathan's Hot Dog. So I'm going to have to watch that so I can be well informed when you bring it up next week. And wow, a couple of real big upsets in the first round with Pegula and Goff out on the women's side. Two best hopes Americans to win at Wimbledon. Tour de France going on. I am on day 249 of taking French lessons.
Wow.
I find myself, well,
you're going to get us, and we can do a live podcast maybe at the Roland Garros in the coming years. That would be kind of cool. By the way, I do need to say I saw the movie. I saw the F1 movie. And just it is well worth seeing. It's highly entertaining, particularly if you like that type of, if you like the Maverick, if you like the Top Gun movies, you'll like this. You don't need to be like F1. You don't need to know F1. There was definitely a lot of things that were a little on the ridiculous side as far as what could happen. But the racing action that they were able to capture beats anything you'll see on broadcast.
Interesting.
It was absolutely fantastic what they captured. And it was a highly entertaining movie. We enjoyed it. So I would recommend it.
Well, I have a question for you. Obviously, when a director makes a movie, no expense is spared to get the shots that they need, right? I don't know what the budget was for that movie, in the tens and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you think that F1 broadcasters will be able to take some of the things from that and incorporate that technology and stuff into future broadcasts?
Technology-wise, I wouldn't be surprised if they try doing it more so from a test standpoint, because the way they were able to outfit some of the cameras were ones that wouldn't necessarily meet the rules that they had. But I would imagine that they do. And because F1 was so involved in this movie, and in fact, where they couldn't get a shot, they subbed in actual broadcast footage to capture some moments. Mm-hmm. It seemed to be few and far between, but they were able to capture that in betting that they tried to, I think, quite well. They had a full garage setup that I saw in person, and it literally was right next to all the other garages. So they handled all that stuff well. Some of the team dynamic things were a little ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, it was solid. And as I said at the beginning of the show, it's the first 4th of July weekend. I've been here for a while, but I am excited not just to enjoy the 4th of July, but actually watch the Silverstone British Grand Prix, which is taking place this weekend. So, and of course, because of last week's guest, the NASCAR Chicago street race on Sunday, I am super excited for as well.
You beat me to it. The weather forecast for Chicago right now is a 50% chance for rain on Sundays. Let's hope that the rain holds off. As my old lacrosse coach used to say, I hope the rain keeps up so it don't come down. Yeah, our past guest and new friend, 𝘚𝘰𝘵 𝘵𝘫, we want to wish her the best of luck. Hopefully the rain holds off for that race, but I'll be watching it for sure. Okay. All right, partner. Happy 4th to you and yours. Happy 4th of July to those who listen, who celebrate. For the rest of you, have a nice weekend in July. Until next week, he's DP, I'm McGhee. We want to thank you for listening. Please subscribe, follow, comment, share with your friends. Let us know what you think, and we'll talk soon.